Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another Anark live stream. I think I nailed it. The mic's a little out of sorts here, but here I am. And also today on stream joining us will be my friend Lee. Ta-da! We are going to be preparing zines for an event tonight for Cooperation Tulsa. So that's why Lee is joining us today, because I'd really not have time in between this stream and the event this evening to do the stuff that needs to be done. So we're going to do the stuff on stream. And the stuff is getting together zines and preparing all of the things that are going to go on our table when we table at this event called First Friday. We try to do it every single month, and so we're getting stuff together for that. Pretty much the only thing that could stop us from going this evening is if it starts raining or something. Good to see that people are already starting to join. Probably need to share this link around and stuff. A zine is basically a pamphlet, okay? That's I don't know, that's just what we call them in the modern day. It used to be they called them pamphlets, but now for some reason we call them zines. We just decided that, I guess. Okay, I'm sharing this all around in all kinds of different places. All right, well, I shared it as much as I'm going to share it, at least. How's everybody doing today? So yeah, I mean, somebody asked, like, is it too early to start questions? No, I mean, y'all can ask whatever you like. So I guess what I should do at the beginning of any of these live streams, and I kind of need to get into this groove, I should probably be like, give you a channel update and so on. So channel update, I am done with the script for A Modern Anarchism Part 4. The script is complete. It's about 23,000 words, if I recall correctly, which is long. The previous parts were like 17 and 18,000 words, so expect it to be even longer than my video essays usually are, which of course has been the trend ever since the channel began. The topic of A Modern Anarchism Part 4 is organization. It's basically like, what is the theory of organization? What are the constraints of organization based on our best understanding of things like systems theory or viable systems theory? So I will be utilizing Stafford Beer and his understanding of viable systems theory in order to build a coherent understanding of horizontal organization. So that is already drafted up. That now needs to move into voiceover, which means I need to record the voiceover and record the talk to the camera portions that will go into that video. Then after those are complete, I will begin working on visuals. And after visuals are complete, then I will begin adding music over top of all of that. So unfortunately, that means we are still probably at least 1 or 2 months out from this thing being finished. It has gone slow, but of course, as I said, it's the longest video essay I've ever produced at this point. In any occasion, that is the biggest channel update I would give. I would also like to say here at the beginning of the stream to give the stream a like. If this is like your first time watching one of these live streams and you are not subscribed, you should subscribe to the channel. I do one of these a month as best as is conceivably possible. Lastly, if you value the work that I'm doing on this channel, then you should go over to my Patreon and become a patron for any amount. It's like $2, $5, $7, $10, $20. Any amount that you can spare would be enormously helpful and absolutely does contribute to the growth of the channel. There was a time when all I could afford to do was upload video essays once every few months because I had to do other work in order to make ends meet. But these days, now that the Patreon has come so far, I'm able to at least attempt to upload 2 videos every single week. So that is the difference that your donations can make. The more patrons that I get, the more time I can devote to the channel, which directly translates into the amount of content that I produce and the quality of content I produce. So it is by no means trivial. It directly corresponds to the quality of the channel. So if that sounds valuable to you, if you are willing to give any amount of money for that sort of end, then you should do so. I would encourage you to do so. Obviously, if you're only here for the live streams, then you can also give me super chats or whatever they're called and contribute to me doing these chats on live stream, because these are themselves worth doing, or rather, these contribute to the success of the channel insofar as that I also get some money for doing these live streams. I can afford to forego doing one of my bigger videos every single month to do this because y'all are so generous. That being said, I think that's about everything I'd want to say on that front. I've already got one of those super chats. I got one from Sam M for $5. He says, have you spoken with Andrewism about his most recent video? Are there any plans to interlocute about it? Because it seems like a big departure. I've already spoken to Andrewism in DMs about some of my different disagreements and criticisms of the most recent video. I think overall it's a good video. I mostly agree with what Andrew is saying in the video. However, there are some specific things that I don't really agree with, and they do represent somewhat of a departure of our viewpoints about organization. That being said, I mostly just try to utilize a method where I speak personally with other anarchists when I disagree with them. I don't really want to make it a spectacle. That being said, the video is still a good video for the most part. I enjoy the vast majority of it. But it looks like a lot of people are commenting on this very specific thing. So it looks like not only you, but numerous people. So I kind of addressed this with Andrewism personally. His only real argument against democracy is an etymological argument. And this is actually a logical fallacy. The etymological argument is a fallacy. It doesn't actually matter what something's etymology is insofar as what it means. We do not only abide by ancient etymology for words to understand what they mean. If we did, most of the words that we use in the modern day would not mean what they do today, because there's such thing as semantic drift. So over time, words can take on all kinds of different meanings. And there's a bunch of different things that contribute to how we should understand the usage of a word. So I don't remember if I've ever said this on a live stream or not, but I have my own personal conception about how we should understand what we do with words, how we understand the meaning of words, and how we should utilize them. And the way I see it, there's kind of 4 categories. Etymology is one of them. Basically, what are the roots of the word? That's one of the categories. That one kind of seems important. You know, it gives us some of the roots of what the word's intention was. However, as we said, there's such a thing as semantic drift. So this category alone cannot give us a sufficient meaning for a word. Category 2 is its history. In other words, how has it evolved over time? How has this word been used in various contexts by various people? This is another important category. Third is, once again, another very important category, and that is, how is the word used in its popular conception? How do most people use the word? This is what actually leads to evolution of language throughout history, because as words become majority used in a particular way, we are going to tend to redefine the word in the direction that the majority are using that word. This is just a natural part of how language actually functions. But then category number 4 is also important, and that is, how is this word situated in a larger discussion about power? How does it serve or undermine certain power structures? That is to say, is this word being defined in such a way that it benefits particular kinds of power structures? Is the way this word, could we define this word in such a way that it undermines those power structures? Is it beneficial to us, whether it is or is not defined in a particular way? I think that you can really only understand the meaning of a word by understanding all 4 of these categories at the same time. And I think the flaw of the etymological argument is that it only considers one of these 4 different conceptions. And it conceives that a word is only what its etymological roots suggest. So this is actually an informal logical fallacy for that reason. That's why it's given a name, the etymological fallacy. That being said, then there's a further argument about democracy being about rulership. Now, once again, this is mostly just an etymological argument, because they say, you know, cracy, or K-R-A or C-R-A-C-Y, it relates to rulership. And therefore, it must be about rulership, and therefore must be about government, and anarchism is against government. Once again, this is still the etymological fallacy, because that may not be necessarily what any of us mean by that. That being said, I at least understand it to some degree. I just think that it's always the wrong way to approach, to only think about one of those 4 categories when you're understanding the definition of a word. It should also be said, the understanding of what democracy means has shifted all over the place. The word has meant all kinds of different things in all kinds of different eras. It is largely just about whether somebody has positive or negative opinions of its connotation, how they then go forward in defining it. And so in the video, he just kind of begs the question that because it has that etymology, that is what it necessarily means. So for me, at least, that was not a convincing argument. I think, however, the place where there was something that was a little juicier to bite into, the arguments that were a little more interesting, at least then we kind of have a place for common understanding for a discussion, was his definition of what he calls the polity form. So I personally don't think that this analysis from Sean Wilber is still very clear. The polity form is basically the conception that there is some body of people who makes the rules and everybody has to follow these rules, that there is some form of head, as you might say. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that only really exists insofar as you have some form of representation or hierarchical power. However, the contention of people like Sean Wilber is that when we create these bodies for broad-scale decision-making, wherein we come to agreements together and then we are supposed to abide by those agreements, absolutely, that this is an extension of the quote-unquote polity form. I think this is where the real meat of the disagreement takes place. And that's because if this is the case, then the polity form just represents people making agreements and holding to agreements, right? And if that's the case, I don't know that it has a lot of meaning. I think it has meaning if it were to refer to representation, which is the classical anarchist critique. However, insofar as that all the polity form means is all of us coming together to make decisions about the sorts of norms and rules that we're all going to abide by in a long-term sense, that this is just a necessity of how large-scale agreement has to take place. And you have to have some confidence that the other people you've come together to make agreements with are going to follow those agreements in a long-term sense. Because if people don't follow large-scale agreements in a long-term sense, what you're going to get is people undermining one another. You're going to get the duplication of efforts where you didn't need that, which is going to be a waste of our energies, which is then going to make it harder for us to have a liberatory society, because a liberatory society relies on us being able to coherently organize all of our decisions and implementations together. If what we have is huge numbers of decisions being made, wherein all of those decisions sort of run contrary to one another, then that's going to lead to inefficiency. It's going to lead to, once again, us undermining one another in our efforts. I think that that is not ideal, that we should be aiming towards large-scale coordination and consistency, because this is what leads to us being able to create a liberatory society. And it's also what is necessary to coordinate very large-scale things on the scale of, say, the globe, for example, or even continents. So that's part of my problem with this. And I would consider that primarily a problem with Sean Wilber, but Andrewism has introduced this construction of Sean Wilber into his theory. Therefore, this is my critique of the video. It kind of manifests also with Gelderloos's concept of quote-unquote chaotic decision-making. I think that this is essentially a symptom of this rejection of large-scale decision-making and consistent implementation. There is no reason to fetishize chaotic decision-making. Once again, chaotic decision-making leads to us wasting efforts and undermining one another on accident. Now, Andrew says that there would be an impetus toward resolving these difficulties and disagreements and contradictions because it would lead to a society that doesn't function as well. However, I think that it's always the wrong approach to take to say that the problem is going to be solved by people doing the right thing. I think what you want to do is create structures wherein all of the incentives and disincentives point towards doing the right thing. You don't just assume people are going to figure it out and be good and cooperate together, because that's not necessarily the case. There are many occasions wherein people are going to have petty feuds, and wherein separations between people are going to be further and further exacerbated insofar as we don't have bodies wherein everybody can come together and resolve their disputes. And trying to boil everything down to these sort of ad hoc or purpose-built organizational forms and sort of rejecting the broader scale needs of people federating together at larger and larger scales of coordination, I think that that is counterproductive. I don't think that that actually is a good way to organize an anarchy. And yeah, this is just kind of the summary of some of my perspectives. But anyway, we got another that's pound, £5, not euro, £5 donation from Baxter. And Baxter says, if U.S. decolonization were to occur, would this apply to those of African origin as they technically occupy native lands, even if they came by force? I think that what a lot of people miss in discussions about colonization, decolonization, and land back is they are assuming there's just like one plan, that when everybody says decolonization or when everybody says land back, that they mean the same thing. And that's not the case. There is all kinds of different views about what decolonization, what land back might look like. So it's almost impossible to answer such a question because different people might give you different answers. Different native people might give you different answers. So. So I'm going to scroll back up and see what was said in the chat while I was giving that answer. Zuba asks, hey, Anark, do you think you've had any major developments in your theory since you've started uploading videos on YouTube? I mean, the answer is absolutely, unequivocally yes. However, I haven't diverged too enormously far from the things that I said at the beginning. I just have much more sophisticated reasons for believing a lot of those things. I think the first things that come to mind insofar as positions that I don't really hold anymore is, for example, in Change and Revolution, you can see some implication that I'm saying that there's a value, or at least a limited value, in electoral politics, or in trying to get people elected that have more progressive politics. And I really don't have that viewpoint anymore. I think y'all know as much, given that I have released so many videos about the dead end of electoralism in a general sense. That's one place. What was the other place I was going to mention? Oh yeah, in the very first, or one of the very first videos I ever did in Human Nature, at the very beginning, I contend that life in nature is nasty, brutish, and short. And I don't really take that position anymore. It may be true that average life expectancy was lower in pre-civilizational societies, but I don't actually take the position anymore that it was nasty and brutish and short in that sense. I actually think that probably a lot of those societies, they did not view their lives as being brutal. They did not view their lives as being extremely challenging and nasty, as Hobbes says. Instead, I think that there were probably just ups and downs to those different kinds of life. I think that probably people in those societies, just some of the things were better about their lives and some of the things were worse about their lives. Obviously, their lack of access to more sophisticated medical care, that's worse. But they also worked a lot less than we do, right? They had more free time. They interacted with nature. They were more connected with nature than we are, which I think probably led to lower rates of things like depression and mental illness more broadly, because there's just less distress at the conditions of their existence than we experience today. And so, yeah, I have a more sophisticated understanding of what the conditions of, pre-civilizational or prehistoric, even though that's really still not quite accurate, pre-Western colonialism, what those conditions looked like. Got another super chat from Eric Gray for $5. He says, recommended reading, Overcoming the Psychology of High School by Wild Youth, and it can be found in the Anarchist library. Yeah, there you go. So that is that. And then I think the other place is that the model I present in After the Revolution is a lot more simplistic than what I would probably think about the situation now. That being said, I don't really disagree with a lot of what I said in After the Revolution. I just think that it was too simplifying. I think that I could probably do a lot better job structuring this out and giving a suggestion as to how a lot of these functions could work. Sam gave $2 and said, hi to the guy in the background, introduce yourself. Actually, Lee introduced themselves right off the bat in the stream. But here's Lee. Lee is in Cooperation Tulsa with me. Today, we're going to be going out and tabling at an event called First Friday. So I just had Lee over here so that we could probably try to get a little bit of work done, putting our zines together and everything. Or sorry, our pamphlets together before we go out and table at First Friday today. So in order to make sure that everything is kind of coming along on the right time scale, I just said, hey, Lee, why don't I come pick you up before the live stream? You can just kind of hang out in the meantime, and we'll try to get some work done while we're on stream. So that is something I plan to do today. I plan to make this kind of like a work stream where I'll answer questions in the middle of us doing things. So I guess with that in mind, what do we need to do? There's the box of zines over there. Have you seen this new cart we got?
I'm doing zine research right now. So if y'all have any good zines to send along, yeah, pop them into the chat. The topic today is popular resistance and yeah, protest and occupation.
So yeah, we're basically trying to find if there's any good like short pamphlets or zines or whatever you would know them as, that just talk about like general protest tactics. There's actually an incredibly good guide called the Black Flag Catalyst Guide to Revolution, but it is too thick to turn into a zine. It's definitely not going to be able to be stapled. But yeah. Baxter gave £5 and said, do you think about Rome? And what's your opinion on the Roman and later on Byzantine state? What can we actually learn from it instead of glorifying it? I do not think about Rome. I do not think about Rome. The only thing I ever think about when it comes to Rome is how Rome had a long decline, that it fell apart, but that there was no single event wherein it just fell apart all at once, and that might be a pretty good model for the United States. The next one is Yu-Gi-Oh! Broke for €2. And they say, thoughts on the Black Army's approach to anarchism? I mean, clearly it was a successful way to organize an army, right? I mean, they defeated the White Army. And in fact, without them, it's possible the White Army would have won the war against the Red Army in Russia. So clearly the Black Army was organized efficiently enough, but they didn't really prepare themselves for the Russians to betray them. So yeah, as Lee said, if you have any good like zines or pamphlets that are about like protest tactics, especially if it maybe conceives of how to include things like general assemblies and so on, that would be fantastic. That'd be very welcome. Feel free to just put those in the chat, and we might actually print some of those out for this evening. Headless to Y'all says, for $5, says, Anarch, what do you think of people who overly use definitions from dictionaries, like when they argue their point, like socialism is when the government does stuff? I think that it depends on what kind of topic you're discussing, but in political theory, that is just like incredibly insufficient. Dictionary definitions are not sophisticated enough to understand all of the details and nuance of philosophy or political theoretic discussions, where there are many different definitions for words being used, and you have to really think carefully about your citations and what you mean, and creating internal consistency with the rest of a theoretical body. Dictionaries really aren't suited to that. They're suited to kind of laying out the popular conceptions or the colloquial use of any given word with a little bit of understanding of the history of expertise on the subject. So yeah, I think that a dictionary definition is really never going to be a useful thing in a political or philosophical discussion. And in a general sense, I think that if somebody uses the dictionary definition in order to bolster their argument, it actually just demonstrates they probably have not done enough research on political theory or philosophy in order to be presenting themselves as experts, as people in any way to be understood as authorities on the subject. Ubik says, so do anarchists have to be pro-democracy like direct democracy? No. I think what I've been trying to point out here is that this word democracy is so nebulous that it kind of can mean a bunch of different things. It can mean all kinds of different things. And that it has evolved over time, and that in many ways it just means people coming together and deliberating and making consistent decisions, and probably also includes some indication that there is a vote or a tally, a poll taken of people's opinions, and then everybody comes together using the poll that was taken in order to further deliberate those decisions. So that's why a lot of people call consensus a form of democracy. But also, just for me, I just don't think that it's super important, this word and how it's used. That's have whatever opinion you like on it, because it doesn't really matter. As long as people understand what you mean with that word, then feel free to use it. If you're talking with other anarchists and you don't want to use the word democracy, then don't. If you were talking with normal people and you're trying to help them understand what you want, tell them, yeah, you want direct democracy. And then if they have misunderstandings, clarify onwards. It's a helpful tool for communicating to normal people. Confused Lefty, I didn't see your question, so feel free to post it again. Knowledge and Defense says, Anarch, if we delegate someone on a global level, then isn't that technically a form of centralization of power, even if revocable? I don't actually know what you mean by delegating someone on a global level. I think you might have the very common misunderstanding that we are essentially electing delegates to make decisions for us. That is not what delegation is. The actual decision-making process always takes place in mass bodies, mass assemblies, where everybody is brought together to make decisions. And then a delegate just carries out whatever mandate has been determined by those council structures. So a delegate never serves the purpose of a representative. That is to say, they are never the ones that come together, propose legislation, determine and deliberate that legislation, and then pass it without our desires. Decision-making never lies in the hands of delegates. Delegates carry out decisions made by the councils. So that's the big difference. Centralization is about decision-making being centralized, monopolized by very few people, and therefore the flow of social power being in the hands of very few people. Whereas libertarianism, or horizontalism more broadly, is about the distribution of decision-making so that everybody is involved in decision-making, and then implementation can be carried out by a few people, whatever number of people are necessary in order to implement the mandate that was determined by decision-making within the original council bodies. So it is an inversion of the centralization of power, if you get what I'm getting at here. Confused Lefty says, I was talking to someone and they said the CNT-FAI was a state because it had the monopoly on decision-making and their implementation in that region. And also dissenters couldn't build a different system. But the CNT-FAI was the masses of people. So that is demonopolization because it's distributed. See, this is the mistake that lots of people are making here. In fact, I think authoritarians get really confused about this. And they think that like this is an on-off switch. That like it's like, is there a body that claims decision-making power? Then authoritarian is a monopoly. Is there not? Then decentralization. That's not how it works. It's about whether it is distributed or concentrated, whether that is narrow or broad. And in the case of the CNT-FAI, these mass assemblies included hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in various parts of the decision-making process. So this is demonopolization insofar as that it distributed power much more massively than what came before. As for people not being able to make contrary systems, yeah, obviously not. Anarchism is not about anything anybody wants is cool and do as thou wilt, and anybody just gets to make whatever system and structure they like. That's absolutely not what anarchism is about. Hierarchical power structures are a threat to the distribution of power, and therefore the destruction of alternative structures that are hierarchical is itself a way of maintaining the distribution of power. The attempt to create hierarchical power structures is itself an attempt to re-monopolize power, to once again concentrate power in the hands of few people. And those systems are going to tend to want to expand and subsume more people into their hierarchicalization of power. Therefore, the destruction of hierarchy is the maintenance of demonopolization of power. This is the problem with thinking of these words as being on-off switches when they really are about gradation. They're about the degree to which something is or is not the case. So, yeah, I don't really understand. But also the CNT-FAI probably would have been open to the establishment of new confederations of horizontal structures. It's just that that didn't really happen. Once the CNT-FAI had established this broad control over these different regions of Spain, nobody was like trying to make alternative horizontal structures. That was not something they were running into. Instead, it's that everybody was wanting more and more to become subsumed into the CNT-FAI's Federation of Councils. So yeah, that makes it not a state in that sense. So let's see if I missed any here. Salim Bojima says, for $5, I'm conflicted on armed struggle. I feel it's essential, but don't ever see myself holding weapons against others. I feel it can escalate quickly. Well, armed struggle is something you don't get to choose. Armed struggle is something that comes to you. If indeed there ends up being an armed struggle in any given nation where anarchists are, it will probably be the anarchists attempting to organize together people for larger collective self-defense. It's very unlikely that we are going to be the ones that start some larger civil conflict. And in that sense, us trying to understand how to engage in conflict is not us desiring the entry into conflict. It is desiring that we have the ability to defend ourselves when the time comes, because we are not going to figure out how to use guns and figure out how to do small unit tactics and figure out how to do battlefield strategy and so on the spot. That's not going to happen. Instead, if that were the thing that had to happen, we would be crushed. That's not going to happen. If we don't start training and preparing ourselves for the possible conditions under which we might have to collectively defend ourselves, we're not going to be able to collectively defend ourselves. We're just going to be subjugated. So yeah, it's not like something we should desire. It's more like something that will impose itself on us at some point, especially if we ever end up being successful building an alternative power structure. Once again, I just want to emphasize that the key of understanding for the anarchist, the key principle of understanding violence for the anarchist is that violence should be done in self-defense. And there is such a thing as revolutionary or collective self-defense, and that's what we should be training for. Knowledge and Defense says, then what are delegates even needed for in the modern era or the age of the internet? Also, what about military leaders like Makhno carrying out orders? So, for example, say you're in a hospital and you get everybody in the hospital together and you're trying to decide who are going to be the doctors, who are going to be the surgeons, who are going to do any given task in the hospital. The decisions are made by the totality of the people there in the hospital coming together in a general assembly of the hospital workers. Then those workers will come together and delegate the person who will be surgeon, delegate the person who will be the nurses, delegate the people that are going to do janitorial tasks, and so on and so on and so on. But crucially, the janitors and the nurses and the doctors all come together with equal access to structural power to determine who will be delegated to do what. That is how delegation works. That's the exact flip opposite of how hierarchical structures work, where people in positions of managerial authority determine who will be in whatever given position within the totality of the power structure. So this is the difference. So what are delegates needed for in the age of the internet? Certainly not what representatives are needed for in the position of the republic. And this is one of the biggest differences between the state and what anarchists are advocating, is that it essentially abolishes these positions of hierarchical authority and representation. And you're right, we don't need them anymore. We don't need these representatives. However, like I've described here, there can be delegates to do all kinds of things. And this leads into your next part about military leaders like Makhno. Makhno was never formally delegated by the entire movement, but Makhno was numerous times chosen by people that were beginning to establish a more anarchist consciousness, was being chosen as someone that they wanted as their leader. There was never a point where Makhno imposed his leadership on the masses of people. Quite the opposite. Makhno went around freeing people from local government and just telling them, okay, cool, now you have all the decision-making power. Figure out how you're going to manage your locality. I actually have some critiques about that fact. I actually think that was kind of a weak point of what they did there in Ukraine. But yeah, Makhno in that sense is a delegate. The problem I would say with Makhno is it's not clear whether he could have been revoked, right? Instead, what we would hope to see is maybe something more like what the Zapatistas are doing with EZLN, where they get to decide everything about the composition and role of the EZLN, the EZLN is actually not the name for the entire Zapatista region. It's actually the name of that militant vanguard that originally came to the region that we now call the Zapatistas there in Chiapas. And so the EZLN is actually the military aspect of the Zapatistas, and they serve at the behest of the Zapatista council structures, you might say. I think that is the approach that you want. You want to make sure that the military is always under the control of the councils. And in that sense, that makes them delegates, because they could also be revoked by the councils. Ubik says, do delegates have term limits? I would say that's up to the people. They can delegate people for as long as they want to delegate them. You know, if you have, for example, some surgeon in your hospital that is a phenomenal surgeon, there's no real purpose in making him not a surgeon at some point. There's no real purpose in being like, you can only be surgeon for 4 years. Like, that doesn't do anything beneficial. If the surgeon is going to serve in that position indefinitely, then all the better. You delegate the surgeon until you don't want them to be surgeon anymore. They serve the purpose of a surgeon for as long as you need them to serve the purpose of a surgeon. I think this is, once again, a symptom of people still thinking of delegates as holding analogous positions to representatives. Delegates don't do the job of a representative in this system. The job of the representative, that is to say, to propose, deliberate, and then pass rules and regulations is done by everyone in this society. It's not just done by some group of people. Delegates don't do that task. That's in fact the task delegates don't do. People other than the people no longer determine mandates. The mandates are determined by the people. They come together and they freely agree to the rules and norms that they all want to follow. So that is the difference. Delegates merely carry out one of these mandates. They merely implement the decisions that were already made by the council. Sky says, what are your thoughts on the anti-work movement? Do you think they're really revolutionary? I mean, there's just so many different flavors of anti-work. Like anti-work historically is just directly associated with socialism and communism, because what they generally mean by work is wage labor. They just mean compulsory labor. So insofar as we're just talking about anti-work as being anti-compulsory labor and wage labor, then yeah, I mean, obviously that's revolutionary. The only way you could abolish compulsory labor and wage labor is by abolishing capitalism. So yes. However, a lot of people that call themselves anti-work, and this has been the case for a few years now, are just people that are against the way that work is managed under traditional capitalism. And a lot of them would have no problem with state capitalism from what I can tell. So it's just a mixed bag. But like, I don't know if I see anti-work as even being a movement. It seems like at best it's just a forum on Reddit. It's not like people are out in the streets marching by the thousands for anti-work. That's not something that's happening right now. So the way I look at it is they might be useful in introducing people to a bunch of texts that are skeptical of wage labor. You know, one that gets passed around a lot by these people is Bullshit Jobs. I recommend people read Bullshit Jobs. It's a good one for them to read. So yeah, I mean, I'll have a problem with it. Me Too says prefiguration and means in compatibility are essential, but do you think political parties could be used under certain circumstances to achieve essential measures to alleviate the social ecological, I don't know, I assume you're going to say like crisis or something? No. I don't think that we should waste our time thinking about what political parties are doing. We should spend our time trying to create enough mass power that it doesn't matter what political party is in power. We can pressure them to do what we like. Knowledge and Defense says, sure, but you said delegates don't tell us what to do, yet Machno said he didn't give people enough direction and later advocated for more discipline, which Catalonia lacked according to Orwell. People having discipline is not the same as being given commands. Self-discipline is a thing. In fact, you can find this throughout platformism and specifismo, the concept of self-discipline. Pretty much everybody agrees that there should be self-discipline. However, Machno, his real problem is, like I said, it was too loose. They would come through a town, they would essentially overthrow the power structure that was there, and then they wouldn't act to help implement a new power structure. They just assumed that people could put it together on the spot. And Machno was right. That was a failure. They should have come in and said, basically put in place some sort of at least loose framework for how people were going to come together and make decisions. It shouldn't have just been like, now figure it out on your own, and the warband goes to the next place. So that's what Machno was talking about. And Machno was saying that the anarchists had not been self-disciplined enough and had not created a more coherent and solidified platform that could be implemented when the time came. This led to Machno producing platformism. So yeah, I don't think that that really has anything to do with the topic of delegates we were just talking about. Confused Lefty says, what do leftists mean when they say their ideology is amoralistic? The main principles of these ideologies have good morals. What they're saying is that it is not based on a foundation of moral arguments. It might be that the ideologies themselves lead to moral behavior, and probably as much as is the case. However, it is not the case that they start from moral arguments. They don't say, based on my ethics and then a political theory. They produce an analysis, which would be true regardless of your ethical recognitions. And it is therefore a statement that regardless of ethical arguments, these political theoretic statements are true. So yeah, that's what's meant. Go Revolution says, so they weren't prefigured enough and arguably acted as representatives. I don't know if I would characterize the Black Army as representatives, but I would say that the other part that you said about them not being prefigured enough, absolutely. There was not enough prefiguration. I think that was the main failure of the Free Territories of Ukraine, that everything had to be instituted on the spot. There was nothing standing, waiting to take power when the previous structure had been destroyed. I think this has been the main mistake of anarchists in a general sense, is just thinking everything is going to work itself out on the spot. That like, all you have to do is overthrow the previous structure and then people will just figure it out. No, they might, if you gave them enough time where they weren't being attacked and there weren't attempts to destroy them after you overthrew the old structure. But that's not the case. We don't live in this world where they're just going to be able to work on their own conditions without any interference. That's just not how the real world works. There's going to be intervention from the outside. There's going to be reaction from the inside. You're not going to have time to just slowly figure it out. You're going to have something in place, some sort of consistent structure for coordination that people already know how to utilize in order to come together and deliberate and make decisions and implement those decisions. So you've asked this a few times, so I'll answer it. What are your thoughts on the pro-Palestinian college protests? One of them was attacked by a pro-Israel mob at UCLA. I support the pro-Palestinian protests. For me, it's that simple, you know. They're protests against violent, genocidal imperialism on the part of Israel. So I support them wholeheartedly. Sorry, I'm checking my phone and stuff because I got to keep track of my schedule for today. Might be on kind of a tight schedule.
Do you think an analysis on like Chaz and Chop would be relevant for this time period?
It depends on what the conclusions of the analysis are.
Yeah, I'm reading.
I mean, I think that my analysis often differs from what a lot of people think about Chaz Chop. Oof. Tessa Jade Price says, do you think these encampments for Palestine can be a form of prefigurative politics? Absolutely they can. However, okay, let me put it this way. Insofar as that they're not going to last, that they're not going to produce something which lasts, then they are not really doing full prefiguration. The concept of prefiguration is that you're creating something that's going to act like a vessel that takes you into the future world, which means you do indeed want to create something that has long-term consistent existence, not just things on the spot that deal with on-the-spot problems. However, it could be said that it's prefigurative insofar as that it gives all of those people an understanding of how to build those structures in the future and how to operate and live in those structures. So it may be prefigurative in the interpersonal and the ideological individual sense, but I don't think it's prefigurative in the social structural sense, because the truth is that those occupations are not going to last forever. They're going to last for as long as the occupations last, which may be until that there is some sort of ceasefire that is negotiated. It may be until there's a concession from the Biden administration, maybe until there's a concession from their particular colleges. But as soon as those concessions come, the occupations will likely end. And therefore, I would say that they as social structures are not very prefigurative, because they won't last as vehicles into the future. That being said, I still think that they are highly valuable, and they could certainly be made into structures which would be prefigurative, which could exist outside of the encampment, but efforts would have to be made to do that. They would have to create these sort of formal decision-making structures, which could then be sort of uprooted and taken outside of the campus occupations. But I don't know enough about what the actual content of these campus occupations is to know whether that's something that will be possible for them at the moment. Who knows? Maybe I'll return someday. You should watch the video after the revolution. So Jessica donated $5, and she says, I read criticism from a communist that anarchism has its roots in liberalism and that it's not a cogent theory. What do you think? They are wrong. Anarchism, all of leftism, and that is to say, all the socialist concepts, all the communist concepts, all the anarchist concepts, they exist as attempts to move past and contrary to liberalism. Anarchism is just part of that. So all of them are based on the understanding that that liberalism failed to bring about its claims, its foundational claims, and that repeating the tactics of liberalism is not going to work. And this is the common recognition among anarchist, socialist, communists, and so on. The attempt by quote unquote communists, many of them aren't even real communists, that anarchism is based in liberalism is in many occasions just a self-report. Many of these people who call themselves quote unquote communists are themselves engaged in much more liberal tactics like electoralism or state capitalism, themselves both being much more similar to what a liberal would do to fix these problems. Whereas anarchism seeks to create a complete negation of liberal society, of the liberal conditions. It attempts to move past liberalism in a very real way. So what you've heard is what I would call a thought-terminating cliche. It's something that somebody says who actually has no idea about anarchism. So actually what I would say to everybody listening is that if you hear somebody suggest that anarchism is based in liberalism, this is actually them admitting they have no idea about anarchism. This essentially means that they have no understanding of anarchist theory. So that's what I would take it as. It's a tell. They know nothing about anarchism. They've never read anything about anarchism. What they've read are a bunch of critiques of anarchism by many of their holy figures like Stalin and Marx, and they don't know any of the context of any of these critiques. They don't know who is being targeted. They don't, for example, you read Marx's critique and it's about Proudhon. They don't have any idea what Proudhon believed. They don't know if anarchists still agree with Proudhon or whether we've moved past him, which we mostly have. And therefore, they don't really have any context for understanding if any of these critiques are true. They just read them and then they repeat them. So this is a good indication this person has no idea about how anarchism functions. Steve says, would you consider Israel existing as a Jewish state as an ethnostate? Absolutely. Yes. Israel is an ethnostate. It is a Jewish supremacist state. And it's also a white supremacist state, because even Jews that do not have what you might call white skin privilege are not being valued in Israel. In fact, many black Jews are just being completely excluded from having citizenship and are basically second-class citizens. So, yeah, and Arab Jews as well are mistreated and treated as second-class citizens. It's also, I mean, I've heard many people just call it an Ashkenazi Jewish supremacist state because it essentially only cares about the Ashkenazis. Excuse me. So Knowledge and Defense asks, Anarch, did all private, not personal, property originate from the commons? Also, what are unique lessons and contributions from Marx to libertarian socialist theory not first found in other theorists? So the answer to the first part is no. Did all private property originate from the commons? No, that's not the case. The first private property that we really see, like there are occasions of private property that go really far back, but they were uncommon. They mostly are associated with the merchant class and people who were like shopkeepers and so on. And I would say that private property, the regime of private property and the concept of wage laborers and surplus value extraction and all of that, that originated in the 1500s and 1600s in many of the sort of low-lying city-states of Italy and surrounding areas. That was where we first started to see these people who were like shopkeepers and merchants begin moving into a broader ownership of the means of production and then employing people through wage labor. However, there was still a gradation from the old structure of things where previous to that, what you had was, guilds, and the shopkeepers were experts on their craft, and then they would take on journeymen that they were then teaching. So there was kind of this sort of like master and apprentice relationship that characterized a lot of those shops that existed. But as time went on, they more and more came to own these means of production of various kinds. And you then saw the early accumulation of private property beginning to take place. And this especially took place as you saw the rise of the factory system, which also corresponded with a lot of specialization of labor. And then what you had was the people who had invested in the factory or on these assembly lines that were essentially rudimentary assembly lines that were existing. These people came to have this sort of de facto control that is more familiar to us as being an employment relation, as being the owner who just makes money off of the accumulation and recirculation of their capital, as opposed to people beforehand, where it was mostly like, once again, a sort of master and apprentice situation. And some of them as well were basically like traveling merchants, where they were just buying in one place and selling in another. That was also a very common affair. But both of these groups of people ended up slowly evolving into the early bourgeois, which then over time began to accumulate more and more power, and therefore essentially prefigured capitalism in the 1500s and 1600s. The most significant thing to note about the enclosure enclosure of the commons was just that this sped up the process enormously. Instead of them slowly accumulating economic control just through sheer economics, the capitalists cooperated with the state. And this was the era of what we might call mercantilism, by the way. The capitalists cooperated with the state, and the state in turn helped them enclose large amounts of land and property which were previously in the commons, which previously functioned under what you might call usufruct property relations. So the notable thing about the enclosure of the commons was just that it was speeding up the process of what Marx sometimes calls primitive accumulation, and putting more and more power in the hands of the capitalists, instituting private property in that sense. As for the second part, that's more of a Zoe Baker question. What are the unique contributions from Marx to libertarian socialist theory not first found in other theorists? Yeah, I don't really want to answer that insofar as that I don't think I'm well read enough in the really old stuff to kind of be like, yes, this is what I noticed being the difference. My impression though, is that he gave us a robust understanding of how Hegel's alienation theory corresponded to alienation from power. And he gave it to us mostly in this economic form, alienation from, other people that you work with, alienation from the product of your labor, and so on and so on and so on. It was mostly an economic alienation theory. However, this was something that really was not very present beforehand. This concept of alienation being a driving force of people being miserable, people not getting their desires. This was essentially Marx contributing this alienation theory to the broader theoretical base that we're all familiar with now. And it might even be said that anarchists took alienation theory to its maximum extent, talking about alienation from decision-making and implementation. And so that's the most I would really say with confidence. RD, that was something I talked about at the beginning of the stream. So if you want to scroll back and watch the beginning of the stream, first thing I did was talk about Andrewism's newest video. Knowledge and defense. No, he's not managing the chat. They're just chilling while while I'm on stream, because we also need to be like multitasking and getting zines and stuff together for a tabling this evening. So. Give me just a second. So somebody asked, this is the reason why I was just looking something up. They said Hegel inspired Marx. Which thinkers inspired anarchists? And honestly, a lot of the people inspired, they hold a lot of people in common that inspired them. That is to say, everybody was inspired by what are now called the utopian socialists. People like Fourier, for example, and Saint-Simon. These people were very influential to pretty much the whole socialist movement. but also specifically a lot of anarchists cite Godwin and Diderot as being very influential for them. I have never actually read Godwin or Diderot, however. Robert Owen. Yes, another person mentioned Robert Owen. This is not the same Fourier as the guy who did the Fourier transform. Actually, Fourier is a very, very prolific name. There have been a lot of Fouriers. Will Nielsen asks, is libertarian socialist the same as an anarchist? The way I look at it is libertarian socialism is just a bigger Venn diagram, and anarchism is a kind of libertarian socialism. Andre says, do you usually answer questions about economics just asking because my question to others were skipped, so I don't keep asking the same thing? I didn't see the question. I guess it depends on what the question about economics is. Andre says, I saw a video where you mentioned Parecon. What are your thoughts on it? It still has a non-transferable income system. Could that be considered a communist economic system in your opinion? I like Parecon. I think that it's very grounded. I like that it actually is proposing like a viable model instead of just being like, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I'm just done with the argument. We'll figure it out. Like, I'm just done with that at this point. We're not going to just figure it out. That's not how this works. We have to begin building things now that look like the future. So it actually is kind of important that we do ideate a little bit on what we think the future might look like. I see Parecon as being a very viable transitionary system. I think it's very likely that Parecon could do the work of supporting us during a period of time where we have to still interface with outside markets. As for, is it the end goal system? Probably not, because it still has money, but I think that it is a very, very viable intermediary system, a system that might take us to that future society. So I tell people to read about Parecon all the time. I think it's very cool. It's got a lot of good ideas in it. Confused Lefty says, I'm going to repost my question. Hope it's not annoying. Do you agree with Marx that capitalism was necessary to develop the means of production that is most conducive for communism? Absolutely not. Biggest L of Marx. And some people have told me that Marx didn't even actually believe that. Especially given that Marx actually seemed to think that the Russian peasantry was very open to socialism or communism being established because they had such strong communistic systems already in place. So it's not clear that even Marx thought that. That is actually very much what we call stagism in leftist theory. And a lot of people hold these sort of stagist conceptions, believing that it has to go, in a particular order of evolution. But that is pretty much completely disproved. That's just false. It's not true at all. And Marx may or may not have actually been a stagist. I've seen people provide passages which suggest both directions. But my personal opinion is that systems develop themselves, not their negation. See, the cat is like, I see that you're like distracted, but maybe I could interrupt. Long Defiant asks, in your opinion, would it be better for anarchists to move to a specific location and influence the local social relations, or to stay spread out and attempt to influence more broadly? Both, I guess. I think that it's probably better for people to change conditions everywhere. It's really important that we change conditions everywhere. It cannot be that we just go to the wilderness and try to influence local, locals and out there in some other place. That's fine to do, but it's got to be an all of the above approach in that sense, because we're going to need development both in the urban centers and in the rural areas and in the suburban areas. There's nowhere that we can just abandon. So I generally discourage people who are like in city centers of just like moving off to the wilderness and trying to start everything from scratch in the wilderness. It's not to say that I'm saying that that's always bad. Like, you can do that if you like, but that's not the method that I advocate that people do in a mass sense. Will Nielsen says, is Stagism different to incrementalism? They sound kind of similar. No. Or, I mean, yes, Stagism and those are not the same. Incrementalism just says things have to be changed slowly. That's incrementalism. Things have to be changed in small increments. Whereas Stagism says that there is a set of stages that everything has to go through. You have slave society, which becomes feudalism, which becomes, more monarchic, which becomes capitalism or mercantilism, which then becomes full-blown capitalism, and then that becomes socialism, and then socialism becomes communism. This belief that you have to go through a set of stages in order to develop the next system, that's Stagism. Incrementalism is just that things need to change slowly. Lazarus, the only reason I didn't answer is because that's just one of those questions I've been asked 1,000 times. But religious anarchism, whatever helps people come to the conclusion of anarchism, fine with me, so long as they obviously don't hold contradictory principles to anarchism. If their religious beliefs are what lead them to anarchism, it's fine with me. So, the way I look at it is, if you're talking with Christians, don't start by trying to get them not to be Christians. Introduce them to Christian anarchism. If you're talking with the Hindus, don't start by trying to get them to not be Hindus. Introduce them to Hindu anarchism, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, if you want to have a conversation with them later about how certain things they believe might be necessarily hierarchical, then you can have that discussion. But we absolutely cannot spend our time trying to push back against religion before we are going to tell people about anarchism. So meet people where they're at. That's what the movement needs to do. Meet people where they're at. Maximus, that question was answered earlier in the stream. So if you want to scroll back, you can go listen to my answer on that one. NM says, do you know if mutual aid by Kropotkin is actually regarded somehow in academia? Yeah. No, mutual aid was like actually taken seriously by evolutionary scientists. Kropotkin was a publishing biologist. You know, he was a naturalist, as you might call it. Kropotkin went to scientific conferences and gave talks and published papers and stuff. Mutual aid was taken very seriously and was considered to be a robust argument against Herbert Spencer at the time. Today, I don't know as much. I don't think people talk about mutual aid in the modern day. But back in his day, yeah, that was actually mutual aid began as a series of speeches that he was giving to his colleagues. So they took the speeches, he took his speeches and then he turned them into a series of essays, which he then compiled into a book. Andre, I think the problem here is that you are thinking of things with still having distinct value. You're still thinking of things as having more or less value, as being comparative in their value. So you're thinking about what you produce as opposed to what you produce, or as, sorry, you're thinking about what you produce as opposed to what you consume, and then you're trying to think about comparing the values of each. But I think this is the wrong way to think about a direct distribution economy. Everybody is going to contribute what they can. They're going to contribute things that that provide value to society in a broader sense, and they're going to consume things that they need. That's just going to be how things are distributed. But there's never going to be a time where we sit around and take account of whether tutoring is more or less valuable than a watermelon. Some people need watermelons. Some people produce watermelons. Some people need tutoring. Some people can tutor. But there doesn't need to be some process wherein we compare the value of tutoring and watermelons. That's unnecessary. Meineke Man says, speaking of science, do you know of any theorist who has analyzed the use of hierarchical language in science? I'm thinking of expressions like laws of nature, states of matter, etc. The only ones I can think of are myself. And I also read an essay that was about cybernetics that started with a discussion about hierarchy and the use of this word hierarchy. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, so I found it. It's called Toward an Anarchist Cybernetics, Stafford Beer, Self-Organization, and Radical Social Movements by Thomas Swan. I'm going to link it here in the chat for y'all. He starts by talking about this word hierarchy and how it's used in the sciences as compared to how anarchists are using it. But I also discuss it in part 2 of A Modern Anarchism, if you want to go read that as well. I think there's also another one. It's like, what is it called? Analytic. I think Analytic Anarchism is another one. And I think they also, Alan Carter, yeah. I think that's who did it. Alan Carter, Analytical Anarchism. There we go. It kind of like reconceptualizes some of these things being discussed in the sciences, but it doesn't I don't think go toward a critique of that. But yeah. Andre says, but if everyone consumes more goods and hours of work than they produce, the system will simply collapse. There won't be enough goods for everyone. Well, that's something we can keep track of. You know, we can keep track of demand, right? We can keep track of desire and fulfillment. And if we find that there aren't enough watermelons, we tell the people who are growing watermelons, hey, there aren't enough watermelons. And then we find some way to compel them to grow more watermelons in one way or another. You don't need a central authority for that. You just need some way of keeping track of the answer. In fact, it's probably better to not have a central authority doing that, because a central authority is going to get overwhelmed by the amount of information it's receiving. It'd be way better if you could create an algorithmic and decentralized system that takes inputs and produces outputs based on that algorithm. I know the kitties just be going crazy behind me. I can hear them knocking stuff over. It's Me Spiv says, what's your opinion on Thorstein Veblen? I haven't read Veblen, so I can't really weigh in on Veblen themselves. However, I know he was very influential to both Bickler and Nitzen and Lewis Mumford, both of which I have really taken on board in my own work. Will Nielsen says, do you ever wonder if an anarchist revolution feels closer just because you're aware or a part of the movement? 99% of people nowadays just think anarchy means chaos. I actually don't contend that the revolution feels close. That's never something I've claimed personally. I think that it's possible we're decades out from anything that could be a substantive anarchist revolution. And there's a lot of work for us to do in the meantime. So I don't personally take that view. If you want to know my view of how all of this development takes place, you should watch part 3 of A Modern Anarchism, which is all about revolution. Yeah, like I will link y'all that. So here it is. There's part 3 of A Modern Anarchism in text form. And if you look at the chart that I present in that video, I think we are in the stage I call catalysis. Catalysis is literally the second stage of quite a few stages. Okay, let's see here. If we did it in the loop that I present, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so it's like the second of 4 or 5 stages, depending on what route we take. So I wouldn't say we're actually that close. We're in catalysis. We have to do the work to get out of catalysis and into the next stage. Maximus says, do you consider yourself to be a consequentialist? And if so, does that go against means-ends unity? Because consequentialism cares more about ends than means. I am a consequentialist, and it has to be understood that your ends are strictly determined by your means. That's the way you join these two recognitions. Means-ends unity is a recognition that the means you choose changes what possible ends you can achieve. Therefore, in consequentialism, you can't just consider your ends in isolation because your ends are determined by your means. But we are still concerned with outcomes. The thing is, though, the outcomes are constrained by the way we achieve the outcomes. So this doesn't really offer, it doesn't really undermine consequentialism in that sense. It actually is just a modification to consequentialism, you might say. Nielsen, I don't know how you would say it. It's N-E-I-L-S-O-N. Nielsen? Wouldn't that be I-L-E? Rotten Mouse says, were non-vanguard communists like Luxemburg, De Leon, Liebknecht, etc., essentially libertarian socialist? What differentiates what they put forward from anarchy? Okay, somebody just rung my doorbell. Sorry, give me a sec.
I think it was a packer.
Yeah, probably so. I just got a new keyboard. My old keyboard had been screwing up. Knife sharp something? Knife sharp something?
Don't got my knife on me.
Oh, there's scissors. Thank you. So answering the previous question about libertarian socialists and so on, no, they were not libertarian socialists because all of these focused on electoral politics too much. I would say Rosa Luxemburg is probably one of the more libertarian of those socialists, but they pretty much all focused on getting socialists elected and worrying about parliamentary politics and so on. So no, that's not my conception. However, I do agree with you that they are closer to a libertarian socialism than most other authoritarian leftists. In fact, they had very strong anti-authoritarian strains to their thought, but unfortunately, they still did not understand means ends unity. What's that?
They want box ASMR. They want an opening video.
An opening video, huh? Okay, let's see. Here's the keyboard. I got a new DOS keyboard. I already had one, but it was like, let me think. I got it in like my early 20s. So it's been over a decade. I've had my old keyboard for like 15 years or something. And here's the replacement. It also has brown switches instead of blue switches, so it's not as loud. Oh yeah, there it is. See, it's got stuff in it. It's got this. I don't know why I need to polish my keyboard, but there it is. Wow, 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 wow. Oh. Boom, keyboard time, baby. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at it. It's beautiful. Bah, DOS keyboard. Pretty. Pretty, pretty. Oh, one of the keys isn't fully on. There we go. Yeah, that's not as loud. See, I got the blue switches when I was young because I liked the clickety-clackities. But clickety-clackities, they're loud. Much better, much better. I'll hook that up here in a little while. Oh, could you not hear me clickety-clacking? Give me a sec. I'll clickety-clack. Okay, so here's, I don't know if you can. Okay, I think the sound's still working. I don't think I screwed anything up. There we go. Okay, so here's how the old keyboard sounded. Okay, there's the old one. It's the old keyboard. And here's the new one. See, not as clicky, right? It's not as clicky. It's not as clicky.
Rojava and the Zapatistas, are they anarchists?
Rojava and the Zapatistas are not anarchist. They are libertarian socialist. Oh, that accidentally answered Jessica's question as well. Who are some libertarian socialists who are not anarchists? Why are they different to anarchists? Yeah, the Zapatistas, Rojava, communalism more generally. A lot of forms of, say, Marxist humanism, for example, that's also a form of libertarian socialism. These are all examples. There's more examples as well. Council communists. Why are they not anarchists? Because they don't identify with the history of anarchism. They're not anarchist thinkers. They don't draw their thoughts from anarchism. Also, they don't have necessarily all the exact same commitments. They tend to be more economically reductionist. You can be a libertarian socialist and not be intersectional, but it's almost impossible to be an anarchist and not be intersectional. So I am going to pause the stream here for a few minutes. I'm going to use the restroom and maybe hook up the keyboard, and then I'll be right back. So see you in a minute. Oh, there we go. But kind of back. Oof. That worked. There we go. I have returned. And I have a fancy new keyboard as well. If you just want to tell me how many there are, we have that document.
Yeah.
So give me a second, I'll get it pulled up. So we are taking inventory of our zines right now.
Are we good enough? Is that one going out?
Probably so. That seems like a, well, we don't have it on the list, but.
I mean, yeah, I think it's time to maybe like throw some new ones out there too. Got the same ones more or less for the last few weeks. I think I want to do some stuff on like occupation, you know?
Yeah, if we can find a good one or good ones.
Let's see. There's the do-it-yourself occupation guide, which is kind of a classic. I think it talks about I think this is like 2008, 2009 or something. No, they talk about 2011. So this one like 2012.
RD says, how should anarchists relate to libertarian socialism? I really don't think we are diametrically opposed, but I also don't like hierarchy. Libertarian socialism is not like pro-hierarchy. In fact, I would say that the libertarian part is there is a kind of a general opposition to hierarchy. They just don't phrase it that way. It's not how they think about it. And they don't, it's more really what they're missing is the means ends unity. They don't really, that's the part that really seems to be lacking. Like non-anarchist libertarian socialists generally are lacking that means ends unity. As far as what somebody else says, isn't communalism inspired by anarchism? Yeah. I mean, communalism has a lot in common with anarchism. It was kind of Murray Bookchin just trying to kind of, strike out and create a new brand for anarchism at first, even though it does have some distinct differences. Yeah, anarchism is a form of libertarian socialism, as Knowledge and Defense says. Andre says, what are your thoughts on post-leftism and freed market anarchism? Post-leftism is, it's like often it has good critiques, but I don't agree with its conclusions. So like, it seems like it is sort of, it misdefines leftism. Its main critique of leftism is that leftism is like a grouping of alliance. And I disagree. It's not a grouping of alliance. Leftism is a theoretical grouping. So there's lots of factions within leftism that shouldn't be cooperating because they don't have the same ends or means. So that's one of the most common things I see from post-leftism. Often, sometimes post-leftism will also have a critique of economic reductionism. Sure, I agree with that. But leftists don't have to be economically reductionist either. So I don't really agree with they're not post-leftist as far as I'm concerned. They're just a kind of leftism that is a little more self-aware. As far as freed market anarchism, I think that they fetishize the market. It seems like they see anarchism as necessitating some form of market. And the way I look at it is that it might be during a transition, it might be necessary to have some form of a market, but they're like aiming for the market. And I think that's the wrong way to go. So. Andre says that it's not impossible for hierarchies to form unless you're advocating anarcho-cops to ban hierarchical structures. It wouldn't, but anarcho-cops, really weird way to put it. It's called self-defense. Hierarchical power structures are structures that are inherently trying to grow and catalyze more hierarchy, which is a form of attack on the rest of society. So it's not quote unquote anarcho-cops to defend ourselves from hierarchical power structures. In fact, it's pretty much requisite to having a horizontal society that you destroy hierarchical power. Andre says, in a post-revolutionary society, what would stop a group of ANCAPs working for a wage that they would not be allowed to, like the private owner would not be allowed to create a system of wage slavery? Like that would not be okay in an anarchistic society. This would be like them trying to start a slave society or create a bunch of indentured slaves. That wouldn't be acceptable either. Like, that's just how this works. Like we would stop the capitalists from creating a capitalist system. Oh, my camera's out of focus. Let me fix it. There we go. That seems better. So Tempest Lord Raihan asks, what would your thoughts be on Leo Tolstoy and his works? I asked this before, but if you answered it, I probably wasn't there to get that answer. I think he's a useful inroads for getting Christians to consider Christian anarchism, but I disagree with his pacifism. And I'm not a Christian, so... Knowledge and defense, I don't know what this means. Thoughts on synthesis? Synthesis with what? Of who? Synthesis anarchism? Yeah, I don't know synthesis with who. Then you say, could the whole Palestine situation be one of the factors to spark a revolution? Probably not. That seems very unlikely. Then you say, I'm kind of rooting for January 6th, good and competent edition if Trump wins this year. But I don't understand why you're saying that. That sounds like it would be the conditions for the beginning of a really terrible time of despotic rule by Trump.
Maybe talk to him about accelerationism.
Yeah, that would be bad for us. Yeah, so you're talking about synthesism versus platformism, but what does that have to do with the rest of the question? I don't understand. Palestine situation isn't something that only synthesists or platformists would be concerned with. It just seems like it's a broad issue. Oh, no, January 6th will not lead to an uprising against Trump. That is almost certainly not what will happen. There might be protests, but it won't lead to some kind of broad-scale uprising. I can almost guarantee that. I'm looking at my camera. It keeps going out of focus. That's weird. What's that about? I wonder if it's this mic.
Me fucking around in the background?
I don't think so.
Shouldn't be in the focus area.
See, it's weird because when I look at it right now, it's in focus. But when I look at the delayed stream, it's out of focus. Whew. Getting short of breath. My position on synthesism. The basic argument of synthesism is that all the forms of anarchism are all correct and need to come together and use their praxis in different circumstances. I don't agree. All the forms are not correct. They probably all do need to cooperate. I agree with that part. However, I am distinctly a social anarchist. I think that both the collective and the individual are important. So I'm not a synthesis anarchist because I don't just agree that everybody's right in their own special way. I think that, no, people are right and wrong about different things, and different tendencies in anarchism are right and wrong about different things. So I am a platformist because I want to make clear what things we think are correct and build coalitions together of people who agree with that platform. Andre says, if we believe in usufruct, a group of ANCAPs voluntarily working on a private business should be compatible with usufruct, right? Why should anarchists prohibit it? No, it is literally the opposite of usufruct, in fact. Private property is the negation of usufruct. They're literally exact opposites of one another. Usufruct, if you do private property, you're destroying usufruct in the process. Private property is predicated on the prevention of others from ownership of the thing by way of their utilization and labor of that thing. Private property is I don't know how else to put it. It's literally the polar, precise, and exact opposite of usufruct property relations. Panarchism is not real. It's a co-option campaign by ANCAPs in order to try to get anarchists to stop opposing them. It's essentially the same problem of left unity, is that authoritarians are just co-opters and deceivers. The same thing is true of the right wing. ANCAPs are just creating this concept of quote-unquote panarchism in order to get anarchists to cooperate with their enemies. Straight up. Andre, you say it's not the opposite. The ANCAPs believe that the place they work has a private owner. Who cares what they believe? That doesn't matter. Literally, that's the opposite of usufruct. If you work somewhere and you don't own it, it's not usufruct. Period. Like, it's that simple. It's not more complicated than that. Private property is based on the idea that you can own something, monopolize ownership over something, even though you do not operate all of it. Usufruct says that you only own it insofar as you operate it, insofar as you apprehend and utilize it. And that people who therefore apprehend and utilize it have ownership over it. So that's literally the opposite of private property, the precise opposite of private property. Andre, you say, if ownership comes by usufruct and the people who use the property decide to have a hierarchical structure, what's wrong with that? The hierarchical structure itself is the negation of Usufruct. I don't think you're understanding. There's no cheat code. There's no like loophole. Like they are literally conceptually precise opposites. If you have a hierarchy in ownership, it's not usufruct. It immediately, you monopolized ownership by making a hierarchy, and therefore the opposite of usufruct. It's just, there's no other way to put it. Like, you could not create a more opposite notion of usufruct than private property. They're negations of one another. You say, I know it's the opposite. I'm trying to say that I don't see it as incompatible. That's wrong, though. Like I'm literally explaining to you how it's like saying that, black and white are compatible. They aren't. Wherever black is, white is not. Or do you see what I'm saying? They're literally negations of one another. You just cannot have both. You can have black and white alongside one another, but you can't have black and white at the same time. They will no longer be black and white. They're opposites. It's like left and right. You can't have left at the same time you have right. Like you can't have up at the same time you have down. You're either going up or you're going down. If there's somebody who owns it and doesn't operate it, it's not usufruct. Not doing that one again. Confused lefty. It's called gray, Daniel, precisely, and gray is neither black nor white. Scotty says, what's your view of squatting in empty homes of rich people? Right-wingers say it's theft because the homes technically belong to them. Well, I don't believe in private property, so I don't really care what right-wingers think about it. Squatting in empty homes is perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned, and in some occasions might be praxis. What I will say is that it's temporary. I think that in a long-term sense, squatting is not a very good solution to homelessness, because eventually they're going to come in and they're going to oust that person from their home. And therefore, you're basically creating a position of conflict with the police. And it is a slow boil that will probably explode eventually. And that person who you put in a home may very well end up being arrested for that. That being said, that might be preferable to living on the street for that person. And so I'm not saying don't do it, but I am saying that in a long-term sense, that can't be our solution. I think that the solution in a long-term sense is probably going to be some form of community land trust instead. But do I support squatters? Yeah. Like I support them in that struggle. Yeah, as somebody mentioned, it also depends on the country. Different countries have different laws. Different places have different squatters' rights. If you're in a place which has really robust squatters' rights, maybe it's a better thing to do. Sardor says, what's the difference between anarcho-communism and communism? The main difference is just really means ends unity. It's that anarchists recognize that you have to begin prefiguring the future society in the now. Whereas communism also includes authoritarian leftists who believe that one day, somehow, magically, the state is just going to give up its power. It's going to give up its ability to coerce and violently suppress the masses and then magically become communism. So anarcho-communism is just the sober realization that that's never going to happen, and that what we have to do is we have to create a transitionary vehicle which is consistent with our end. It doesn't have to be literally communism, but we have to be doing the work to prefigure, to create communistic relations as much as is conceivably possible within current conditions, and to create systems which empower the people to change the society around them so that they can transition to communism. So that's the big difference. It's the anarchists have the grounded, realistic view that the state will never abolish itself, and therefore the state cannot be used to achieve a stateless society. It's essentially a more realistic form of communism. Scotty says, what does the blackbird on your YouTube channel symbolize? I've just always liked corvids. That's the simple answer. But I guess, corvids also are kind of anarchistic, They both are a collective species. That is to say, they all roost together, but they're also like autonomous insofar as that each of them is like a well-developed being that can fend for itself. So they both have a collective and an individual sense. And I really like that. Also, they're very smart and they clearly do not care about rules, right? They're little rebels. Love them. Love them. They're super smart. One of the smartest animals in the animal kingdom. And, yeah, they're utilitarians. They can eat all kinds of different things. They can survive in all kinds of conditions. I like them. Like them a lot. They're cool. Oh yeah, as somebody says, and they're black, the color of anarchy. Exactly. Platform Radio says, I was wondering how I should change my language to be more inclusive of genderless or agender individuals. Any thoughts? Just default to using they and them. That's step number one. And if you can, use their name. If that's appropriate in some given place, use their name. But if it's not appropriate, just default to they and them and their and so on. Those are all functional, non-gendered pronouns. And then if somebody, of course, doesn't use those pronouns, they can tell you as much, and then you can use whatever the appropriate ones are. Whale says, hey, everybody, Anark here. Love your intro, man. I'm curious on your views of the Nordic model countries where wealth and inequality is managed and unions are involved in business. They're better than other forms of capitalism, I would say they're one of the best examples of capitalism, about as good as capitalism can get as far as I can see, but they are not going to ever lead us to socialism or communism or anything like that. In fact, having spoken to people in those Nordic model countries, those places have actually done a very good job suppressing their radical and revolutionary constituency. There are not nearly as many revolutionaries in those countries because capitalism is providing for them. And so this mixture of capitalism and the state is kind of placating placated a lot of people in those places. But unfortunately, it's also slowly getting worse. So that is to say, it's backsliding into a less social democratic, more traditionally capitalist or neoliberal condition. And so it's actually, in a way, a demonstration that that path is not going to work. Eric Gray, personally, if I don't know the pronouns of any individual, I just use the term homie. Yeah, I mean, you could use, like stand-in words like that. Sometimes people will say, like, use comrade or something. I don't know. Comrade's a little outdated in my feeling, kind of cringy. But homie, sure, yeah. Comrade is too corny for me. Yes, indeed. Cohort. Andre says, rephrasing my previous question, in a stateless society, if a group of radicals decide to form a capitalist commune, no one is being forced. Why use violence to prohibit it? Because the very nature of capitalism is coercion. So by forming... It can't be a commune either. That's not possible. You can't have a quote-unquote capitalist commune. That's not real. By the very creation of this hierarchical system, the people in the process are essentially just consenting to being coerced and exploited. And notice they can't do anything otherwise now. Now they are locked into this hierarchical system. So it's kind of like, people going off and starting a cult, right? You go off into the wilderness, you start a cult where one guy controls everything, and, he can sexually exploit anybody who likes in the commune. He can, he takes everybody's money. He does whatever he likes with it. He controls everything. My question to you would be, should we be okay with cults existing? Okay, so let's rephrase it now. What if it were slaves, right? What if they went out into the wilderness and one guy got to essentially treat like 30 people as slaves? Well, are you okay with that? Are you okay with a slave society being created? Do you think that's just cool and good? We should just deal with that? What if somebody wants to go create a monarchy? What if they want to go create a feudal system? What if they want to create an authoritarian system, an authoritarian leftist system with the state controlling everything? They want to create a new state. Are you okay with all of those? Are those okay to you? I suspect one or another of those is unacceptable to you. I suspect one or another of those you would see as too big of a threat to allow it to exist. Well, all hierarchical power is just such a threat. It must be destroyed because it is exploitation of human beings, because it itself will always try to expand and subsume other places. Now, you might be right that the first solution isn't maybe don't go in there with guns and try to stop it and try to break it up. Maybe that's not the best. Actually, somebody in chat suggested, I actually think that a better solution is probably to just try to first seed a union into the place. That being said, in your hypothetical, they've already agreed to it. So union's probably not going to do much good. But the way I look at it is you have to have a basis for a society such that hierarchical power is rooted out and destroyed as it arises in its infancy, not after it becomes powerful and begins claiming territory. You don't want to give it time to grow. It's like a cancer. Hierarchical power is like a cancer. And just as you want to catch cancer early, okay, you also want to catch all hierarchies early and destroy them before they ever gain enough power to become significant. This is just the basis of a healthy society. It's like we have an immune system against cancer. And this metaphor goes pretty far, y'all. I mean, hierarchy really is like a cancer. Even as the logic of a cancer, it wants to grow and grow and consume, and everything that it grows into, it kills. It really is just like rooting out cancer before it can grow too big. Dank Joshley says, hey, Daniel, I've just been wondering, do you think marriage still has a place in anarchy? Not so much in the legal form, but the tradition of two equal consenting individuals bonding together for life? Yeah, of course. I don't see any issue with that. That's up to them. It doesn't harm anyone else. It's not the development of a hierarchical power structure. It doesn't monopolize power from anyone else. It doesn't involve legalistic, juridical foundations. Seems like it's just an agreement between two people, and people can make whatever decisions they like about the structure of their relationship, insofar as that it does not become hierarchical. Andre says, I mean, I just don't see what ethical grounds we have to stop this commune if all the ANCAPs wanted to do that, if they even took arms to defend their experiments. I mean, once again, I just gave an argument which gives you the ethical answer. Like, once again, anarchism doesn't just mean everybody can do what they like. That's not what anarchism is. Anarchism doesn't mean no rules and no agreements. It doesn't mean do as thou wilt. That's not what anarchism is. Anarchism is the opposition and elimination of hierarchical power structures. You can't have anarchy without destroying hierarchical power structures. Just in the same way that the ANCAPs, if they wanted to go off and start themselves a little capitalistic commune, would have to be afraid that there's going to be forms of sanctions and separation and exile and maybe eventually some form of violent expropriation. They need to be afraid of that, just as fascists need to be afraid that if they want to create a little white supremacist ethnostate or a slave society, the same things will happen to them. I mean, it should be said, I really don't even think that this would happen, because they would be almost completely isolated from society in the process. They would essentially have no trade with any of the federations. They would basically have to fuck off to the wilderness and do everything by themselves. I actually think it's highly unlikely anybody would do that once we've already got an anarchistic society. I don't think anybody's going to go off to the wilderness and voluntarily exploit themselves and allow themselves to be exploited. I just don't see that happening. That doesn't seem likely. In the same way as right now, we're not facing the problem of, slave societies arising out in the wilderness, right? Slavery has been abolished. It's done. Nobody wants to do slavery. And as soon as you've got anarchism in place, nobody's going to want to do capitalism. Capitalism is an inferior way of managing society, just in the same way that slavery is an inferior way to managing society to capitalism. Juan Betancourt says, currently a conscientious objector in the military seeking separation. How do I go about joining an anarchist group without members becoming apprehensive about my status? I really can't guarantee you that there is any way for you to join a group at the moment without them being apprehensive. That being said, probably being open and honest about it pretty early on is a good idea. They might consider it kind of a betrayal if you were to just make it a secret. I wouldn't make it a secret. But I would also, in the same breath, try to reaffirm that you hold these anarchist principles, and that's one reason that's the reason you're trying to become a conscientious objector, right? Like reaffirm that, hey, I'm trying to get out of this, I think that'd be a big part of it. Dank Joshley says, side note, have you read Means and Ends by Zoe Baker yet? I just picked it up at the Anarchist bookstore in Montreal. I'm at the introduction. It's fantastic. I wish everybody would read Means and Ends. That book would be such a good way for anarchists to actually understand what the real history of anarchism is. So many anarchists think that non-organizationalism is the default of anarchism. It just absolutely is not. And if you read that book, you'll see how it's absolutely not the history of anarchism. The history of anarchism as a revolutionary tendency, which spanned the globe and actually overthrew nations, was highly organizationalist, and it came from organizationalist tendencies. And I feel like that book does a very good job describing that, while also giving people a really solid foundation for anarchist theory more broadly. It's Me Spiv says, what do you think about Peter Joseph's idea of an open source system for the design of products in balance with the environment and the availability of resources? Yeah, no, I usually really like resource-based economy sorts of ideas. I like the people surrounding Venus Project. I like the people surrounding Moneyless Society. I'm friends with Zachary Marlowe. I think he's a really cool guy. Me and him talk in DMs all the time. Yeah, no, it seems like good stuff. Good ideation. Tom Drawn. Hi, Anarch. I was wondering how you define feudalism. A tanky linked a tweet where you said feudalism and the state arose at the same time, which doesn't seem to align with how I understand feudalism. Yeah, I was using feudalism in this broader sense about a society where you have lordship and you have serf relations. You have essentially serfs being attached to the land. You have lords who pledge fealty to kings. And these lordly or aristocratic classes act as sort of municipal authorities. It's highly associated with manneralism. And yeah, insofar as that's a definition of feudalism, which honestly, the word feudalism is so vague as to apply to a variety of things, then yeah, I mean, precisely what I'm saying is the case. In fact, the earliest states in existence, the earliest states to have ever existed were monarchies, right? Look at the very ancient state. The most ancient states were in Sumeria. They were Assyrian and what's the very oldest state? I'm trying to remember oldest state in history. I'm trying to remember. What is the first state to have existed? Ooh, this feels nice to type on. Oh my gosh. What is the first state structure to have existed? Yeah, I was right. The Sumerians. Mesopotamia. Oh no, we got Uruk. That's the very oldest. These were all monarchies. These are all monarchies with aristocratic classes. Yeah, it's This is where the state began. The authoritarian leftists didn't like this because they didn't like what it implied about their conception of the world. They also didn't understand the second part of the tweet I was talking about, which is that the modern state arises from feudal conceptions and conditions, which is just factually the case. If you look back at where parliaments, the modern parliament came from, it mostly comes from British parliamentary structures, wherein what happened was the lords were unhappy with absolute monarchy, and they essentially asked the king, and they asked the people, the associations around the throne, to create a coalition wherein the lords came together in a parliament. And this is where we get the phrase House of Lords in Great Britain, and why we also have the House of Commons. This is where it all comes from. It comes from the development of the parliament under feudalism. And this is distinctly where parliaments come from. There was, this evolved seamlessly into our modern day parliaments. So that's all that was being said in that message. They're just looking for a gotcha. Anna Krista says, how would an anarchist territory that's large enough to make other countries feel threatened defend itself against nuclear weapons? Could anarchists have nukes themselves? I mean, honestly, we have lots of examples of states that exist that are threats to other states, and they're not just nuking them, right? It doesn't seem to be like the solution that current world powers are using. I suppose it's possible in the future that might happen, but that doesn't seem to be the solution. Could anarchists have nukes? I suppose. I personally don't think that's impossible. Anarchists could develop nuclear weapons as a form of self-defense. Got a super chat from Jay Deacon for $5. And he says, of course, I oppose an ethnostate, but I was questioned on native sovereign land and didn't have an immediate answer. Thoughts? I don't know what that was about. I don't understand. Are you saying that somebody called native sovereign lands an ethnostate? Is that what you're trying to say? I don't know. I suppose you'd have to clarify on that. Knowledge and defense. Yeah, I didn't answer that one because why are you talking about taxes? What? You're talking about taxes in the modern day? You said, hot take as a social anarchist, I'm also against frequent taxes. I don't know what frequent taxes means, because I believe that if you need to economically rebalance your system, then the system is flawed in the first place. You mean, yeah, obviously that's the case. Capitalism is flawed. Oh, in an anarchist society, I don't know. I guess that's just up to anarchists. Like, if things are not distributed properly, I don't see a problem with using taxes to do that. Insofar as everybody agrees to the taxes. Doesn't seem like an issue for me. People can do whatever form of redistribution they like. Okay, so you're saying that what I said about the Cherokee having an ethnostate is what you're talking about. I don't think that it really has the characteristics of an ethnostate insofar as that it doesn't come along with these sort of fascistic tendencies. It doesn't come along with the tendencies that essentially like enclosed land, which place dissenting opinions in concentration camps or imprisoned. It doesn't kick people out, at least not most conceptions that I've seen. So. Okay, cool. My appointment moved. That's what I needed. What time do you think we're going to be done with Flat Rock tomorrow? Got to get that mower fixed.
Yeah. I'll probably look at that for a few hours. I'm not positive that I'll get it fixed
I'll put it for 8, my appointment.
Yeah, that's probably safe. Someone wants to start a CT in Jackson, or no, in South Florida.
Special Beamkin says, what are a first few steps for starting something like Cooperation Tulsa or Jackson in my area? Greetings from South Florida, by the way. I mean, Cooperation Tulsa started with 2 people, me and Roberto Mendoza. So what you need is probably at least one other person who's just down with making a cooperation and understands what will be necessary to do it and has an understanding of social ecology and maybe also understands the Zapatistas. Study what happened in both of the examples, in both Cooperation Tulsa and Cooperation Jackson. I can tell you in Cooperation Tulsa, one of the big things that was effective for us was trying to meet people where they were at and then help them build dual power. So we did a lot of cooperating with historically black churches here in Tulsa. And then we got money together, built community gardens, and tried to include a democratic aspect with those community gardens. And that was enough to get the project started. But the thing is like all of these basically always start the same way. You get at least one other person, preferably more than one. You create a charter. You make social media, and you begin doing what you might call social insertion. You attend the meetings of other groups. You go out there and you see what kind of things are already happening. You become present in whatever social struggles are taking place. And you become visible such that you're there and people know who you are and what your whole deal is. And I would say that insofar as you do social insertion, like I said, like you go to other groups' meetings, be upfront. I'm with Cooperation, blah, blah, blah. And, I'm just here trying to, build bonds and trying to figure out how we can collaborate and figure out what y'all are about. Like that's pretty much how it starts with everything. That's how everything starts, not just the cooperations. And then over time, you try to, slowly accumulate resources which can be used to build dual power. Scotty says, what do you prioritize more, worker ownership or decommodification? Me personally, I prioritize the latter over the former. I would say the former, worker ownership, because worker ownership is necessary to have decommodification. You can't have decommodification without worker ownership, as we've seen in all of the state capitalist projects. Anytime they tried to do decommodification without worker ownership, it was disastrous. And that's because centralized systems cannot properly do decommodification because they cannot take into account all of the different signals that are occurring within society. So worker ownership, it at least is the precondition for decentralization and social ownership more broadly. And then that actually allows us to do decommodification because now we have alternative systems by which we can determine distribution and by which we can disperse the measurement of the signals and therefore decision making more broadly. Tom Drawn, thanks for answering with respect to feudalism. I'm thinking you're trying to give the word a more functional definition that basically means monarchy, while usually it's used as a vibey term for the post-Roman Europe. Yeah, no, I'm trying to use it in a functional sense. Like in a general sense, I don't use words in this sort of vibey way. Yeah, when I look at the conditions of those examples I gave, Mesopotamia and Egypt and so on, these really do not differ enormously from feudal Europe. to the degree where I'm not inclined to use a special term for that. One thing that I will say is, for me personally, the way that I've been using them for a long time, and I fully accept perhaps I'm not using them in a normal way, I think that I tend to use feudalism as being the emphasis on a lordly power, and I use monarchy as that sort of emphasis on kingly power. Because what I've noticed when studying the different, history of medieval structures like the ones we're describing here is that different portions of history, the lords have more power, and different portions of history, the monarchy or the king has more power. And so when I think about the word feudalism, I'm mostly thinking about this lordly power. And when I'm talking about monarchy, I'm thinking about that kingly power. So in a general sense, that's how I'm using the terms. But also, I'm just trying to use them in a way that maybe people are going to connect with. So by feudalism, I'm just kind of including both arrangements a lot of the time. I admit I'm not being super precise. I'm also kind of using a vibes-based term, but I'm trying to make it more precise, as you can see. I'm trying to give a name to these structures of lordship and patronage and fealty, of centralization within the power of the king. The king is a representation of the people, and so on and so on. So that's what I'm getting at, but yeah. Wouldn't the economic calculation problem also exist with decentralized planning? I don't believe in the economic calculation problem. It's not an issue. The economic calculation problem presupposes that it is a problem. That's all I'm saying. Journalist Vincent Bevins, Jessica gave $5. She says, journalist Vincent Bevins discussed a failed anarchist revolution in Brazil in a Novara media interview. Why did anarchism fail in Brazil? I do not know to what that refers. I know about the failed anarchist revolution in Uruguay, which is associated with the FAU. These were the ideological predecessors to what is now called FARG and the OSL and the broader federation of groups. However, I will say this, even though I'm not exactly sure of that specific situation, anarchism in Central and South America has been largely predicated around a sort of guerrilla militancy. Anarchists, just like the rest of the left tendencies there in Central and South America, were highly influenced by Folkismo. And Folkismo is associated with Che Guevara and what they did there in Cuba. What did the cats just do? Okay. And what we found is that that does not always work very well. What I was reading about in Uruguay, at least, was that they tried this, and what it led to was just prolific state suppression. And FARG and the current OSL has actually learned that that sort of accelerationist approach, where you're trying to push the issue in a militant sense, does not work super great if you don't have a constituency. And so what you see today in a specifismo is their recognition that they have to integrate with a social movement. They can't just get guns and become a little guerrilla group and fight the state. Because what happened with Folkismo in Cuba was that they essentially went to the rural areas and then they got a bunch of rural people together in order to do guerrilla combat. And then they went to war with the state. And more and more people rose up in sympathy with the guerrillas rather than the state, and this led to the overthrow of the state. However, what we saw in some other places that tried to use Folkismo is that that is not what happened in some of those other places. Instead, people sided with the state and blamed the militant guerrillas for starting a conflict way too fast. And so then they got suppressed and nobody backed them because they didn't have a mass movement. Carlos gave 10,000 COP, which I need to find out what that is. COP currency. What is COP? Colombian pesos. Ah, I see. That is a very inflated currency. It's the 10,000 COP. What is 10,000 COP to USD? Ah, okay, about $3. Yeah, that's a very inflated currency. Anyway, Carlos asks, thoughts on feminist thesis against monogamy as one of the systems of hierarchization, consumption, and centralization of social relationships? I do think that in a hierarchical society, monogamy is definitely one of those tools of maintaining hierarchical power. But I don't think that by its very nature, monogamy has to be hierarchical. I think that the values that we practice in monogamy in the modern day are very hierarchical. In fact, I've argued that they are very much an analogy, a parallel to the concept of private property, insofar as, you own this person at the expense of others. That is to say, you others cannot access this. It's like it's yours, it's your property. Whereas polyamory is more like the concept of usufruct, like what we discussed earlier, right? So I would agree. However, I would say in this situation, I think that we should, insofar as that there's not actually hierarchical power being created within these consenting relationships, that there's nothing wrong with it, right? Two people, I guess you might say this is a demonstration of free association and autonomy. People have the right to make whatever decisions they like for their own bodies and their own lives, insofar as that they're not creating a hierarchical power structure. And monogamy does not create a hierarchical power structure over others. And within the relationship, you would also hope that there's not a hierarchical power. That is to say that neither of the people that are together have power over the one another or have the power to make decisions within that monogamous relationship. And insofar as that monogamous relationship is consenting and that there isn't that dynamic, then I don't see a problem with it. Once again, it's just an extension of bodily autonomy. What I think is the problem is when we have a society of cis heteronormativity, or rather monogamous normativity. Then people are being forced into monogamy. People are essentially required to be monogamous because monogamy has been made default, and people are punished for going outside the bounds of monogamy or choosing non-monogamous relationships. That's a problem, and then therefore turns monogamy, yes, into, in many ways, a very hierarchical phenomena. And we can see in a lot of course, monogamous relationships, there is hierarchy in a lot of those relationships, especially traditionally. Right? Traditionally, the husband has almost all the power in monogamous relationships. However, we see the dissolution of this in the modern era. So I'm not going to say that monogamy is by its very nature hierarchical, but I will say that it's certainly mixed up with hierarchical power structures. It has its root in hierarchical power, and there's definitely some conceptions inside of it that have like parallels to private property. But I think that it is, once again, not itself a hierarchical power structure. Therefore, it's just a demonstration of the precept of bodily autonomy and free association. Got $2 from Juan Betancourt. That's just a thumbs up. It's pretty sweet. Nice. Okay, so I'm probably only going to be on here for maybe another 20 minutes because we have to finish up and get everything ready so we can go out to table like we were planning. We are going out downtown because every first Friday of the month, Tulsa has something called the a First Friday Art Walk. And Cooperation Tulsa goes out there and tables literature and talks to people about social ecology and communalism and anarchism and all the work that we're doing there. It's Me Spiv says, what do you think about the Marxist critique of anarchists being moralistic in their analysis? It's false. This is another one of those giveaways that they don't know anything about anarchism. So like I said earlier, you know, like there are certain tells when a Marxist has no idea what they're talking about. Those tells are that they think anarchism is liberal somehow, that they think anarchism is all about the individual or individual freedom. And this one here, thinking that anarchism is predicated around morals or a moralistic analysis. Those are all clear tells that they have no idea what they're talking about. That they have never read anarchist theory, they haven't engaged with what it actually says. It tells you that all they've done is if they've engaged with Marxist critiques of anarchism. Anarchism is not based on a moral conception of the world. Don't get me wrong, there are anarchists who base their anarchism on a moral conception. I'm not saying they don't exist, but that is not the basis of the anarchist worldview. The anarchist worldview is an analysis of how power structures work. Okay? It is an analytical approach that recognizes that power structures have certain tendencies and that the ideas of people within those power structures cannot overpower the tendencies of the form of the structures themselves, that the forms of structures themselves, in fact, have a reciprocal reconditioning effect upon the people that are within those structures. And what I just talked to you about right there, what I just summarized, that's what we call political materialism. Materialism is the idea that, more broadly, what people usually in political theory mean by materialism, is that the form and content of structures, both environmental and social structures, has a social conditioning effect upon those that are within them, and that ideas do not overpower social structures. They do not overpower environmental structures. Ideas instead are formed by the conditions of the surrounding society. That is to say, anarchists are just materialists about power structures. They just recognize that all kinds of power structures, not just economic structures, have this reconditioning, social and social and psychological reconditioning effect. So you can attach this to morals. I think that it definitely produces an ethical system, and you could start with an ethical system which produced anarchist arguments, but that you don't need to even involve ethics or morals of any kind in the anarchist analysis in order to arrive at the anarchist analysis. Anarchism is essentially consequentialism, but modified with means ends unity. So there are compatible ethical models, but it is not required for you to have any particular ethical model in order to come to the conclusions of anarchism. Sorry, the cats are being ridiculous off screen. They've decided that the box with the zines in it, that's a cool place to sit. XL Step says, hot take, polyamory is greedy. They want to have their cake and eat it too, and don't like commitment. It's a form of greed. We need to be intellectually honest about it. That is not true at all. In fact, polyamory, if anything, is about more commitment. Now you have more than one partner. Now you actually have to commit yourself to more than one romantic partner. That means that you actually have to spend more time worrying about their needs. It's not greedy. It's just not having these very socially prescribed boundaries of what you get to have from your partner. The relationship is now an open negotiation. The 2 of you, 3 of you, 4 of you who are involved are now all part of a process of deliberating what you all want from the relationship. It's essentially, it is much more an anarchistic approach to relationships. And so what you can get is pretty much polyamory can take every single configuration you could conceivably imagine. In fact, there are polyamorous people that for periods of time, it's just 2 of them. And then one of them gets a partner or another one gets a partner, or they both share a partner. It's a triad. You can have every conceivable configuration, including people who literally don't even go seeking out new sexual partners. All they want is romantic partners. You can have people that have like 5 boyfriends or whatever. You can have every which configuration of this structure that you like. It's really just about it being open to negotiation and discussion, and that people's desires and boundaries are theirs to decide rather than the social structure of monogamy being forced on them. So that's actually the problem I was discussing earlier, is that the normativity of monogamy is one of the main problems. It's that it's enforced on people who may not otherwise consent to it, but they have to because it's the only arrangement they're allowed to have. Whereas polyamory starts from the perspective that everybody's consent and open agreement is really the basis for the relationship. Did you do the thumbs down? That's hilarious. I didn't even notice. That's so funny. Boo! It's pretty funny.
Pro-polyamory around these parts.
Yeah, around here, we're pro-polyamory. You hear me? XL Step, what do you mean if I say so? All I did was just tell you the reality of the matter. There's nothing I said that's open for debate. I literally just gave you an account of what polyamory is. There's not really any place for disagreement in that description. You could disagree with my conclusions, but you can't just disagree with the description I just gave.
Seems to like necessitate like this idea that there's like it's being forced on some people or something, you know, like some people don't get a choice. Like for those, like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think it's funny to frame polyamory as being greedy, because it suggests that we should all just get one partner and share the rest with everyone else. Like there's like a partner economy. Like there's like a partner economy that we're all worried about throwing off balance, you know, like
We're going to run out of partners.
We're going to run out of partners. It's greedy. I can't believe you're hoarding partners all to yourself. Other people could be with those partners. It's pretty funny. A Goofy Goober, love the name, big fan, says, do you have any tips for pushing an organization toward more direct collective decision-making, rather it be a vote or ideally consensus making? I'm part of the socialist org that does theory class. I think it's going to be difficult a lot of the time, because suggesting that you move towards that is sometimes going to have resistance if there is like a hierarchy already in place. People who support hierarchies are generally going to be resistant to dissolving them. But you should probably develop a sort of formal proposal for what everything would look like. That is to say, create a charter where this consensus decision-making is built in, and then walk them through how you'd like to see things function, rather than kind of like ideating openly, kind of be like, hey, this is kind of like where I would like to see the organization move. Carlos, with another 10,000 COP, Colombian pesos, that is, Thoughts on how to act to free ourselves against techno-feudalistic systems or turn into unions or federalize the platforms owned by plutocrats? I think when it comes to technology, we really are just going to have to create alternatives. I don't think there's much like building the new in the shell of the old that's actually going to work, because we don't have control over the code base or the servers. That's just not ours. You know, like imagine we took over the whole website and we were like, yeah, it's only us here. And we say blah, blah, blah. They're not going to care because they have control over the servers. They have control over the spigot of information. They can do whatever they like to suppress us. They can just kick us all off the platform. You know, these are all options for them. So insofar as we don't have any control over the root of power, and we don't when it comes to places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, that means we're going to have to create alternatives if we want to see control. So that is to say, prefiguration once again. James Oakley says, if anything, it's less greedy. It's much more about equity and openness. I would actually agree. I think it is less greedy because, in fact, it is much more greedy to take something to yourself and prevent other people from having access to some given resource or thing, right? It's generally what we mean by greedy. We're saying greedy things about hoarding. But that's the opposite of what's taking place in polyamory. If anything, it's opening up those conditions. It's the opposite of greed. It's saying, actually, I don't own my partner. I don't get to decide what they do with their body. That only under consenting relations do I have any control over my partner. That the two of us have to have a discussion about what it is that we both want, and then we both get to make that decision. So yeah, it's the opposite of greedy, if anything. It's the cooperative impulse in relationships. Yes.
There's no resource scarcity when it comes to people. And if you're not taking anyone off the market.
Yeah, exactly. You're not taking anyone off the market either. So there's no scarcity. It's not like you're preventing other people from being with that person. So yeah, it's literally the opposite. I have not watched the new Fallout series, but everybody keeps telling me it's fantastic. I should probably just watch it. So we're coming around to the end, so I'm probably just going to stop answering questions here for a little while. I just want to remind everybody that part 4 of A Modern Anarchism, the script is complete. I've finished writing the script. All that's left now is I have to do voiceover, then I have to do visuals, then I'm going to put music over top of it, right? That's what I have to do. That's probably still going to take a couple months, but just keeping you all up to date on my process. Next week, I'll be right back to producing summary videos, and I'd like to suggest y'all go watch the summary videos because those give you a really good idea of what my theoretical perspective is and also what's in the videos: Power, A Modern Anarchism, and Constructing the Revolution, and I might end up including some after the revolution in time. I would also like to suggest that if you support the work that I'm doing on this channel, if you like me doing these live streams every month, if you like seeing me release twice a week, if you like that I'm producing all kinds of different content, just understand that that takes place directly in step with the expansion of the Patreon. The Patreon is what allows me to spend more time on this channel. It's what allows me to devote full-time effort to the channel. So if you want to see the channel expand, if you want to see me continue producing lots of content like this, please go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch. Also, as a consolation prize, because I know y'all really just doing it out of the kindness of your hearts, just truly, just the spirit of generosity. But if you want a little self-interest out of it, if you're just looking for a little personal gain out of the donation, then you also get access to the Anark Discord server, where we have a really great community going, where we discuss all kinds of different things. We discuss praxis and theory and the history of socialism and all these different movements. We're just always having this sort of open discussion about all kinds of different topics. It's just a really good community of people, really smart people, and really nice people, to be honest, like lots of good people on the server. One last thing, just want to mention, a lot of you may know the user Red Sonia, or on Twitter, you know them as Anarchitect, okay? Anarchitect or Sonia, or however you know them, they are in the hospital right now. And they are in the hospital for cancer. It looks like it is lymphoma, and the lymphoma is relatively advanced from what we can see. Sonia's in a lot of pain, is very sick, and it's really not clear how everything's going to turn out. So this is a very distressing time. It's distressing for me as Sonia's friend, but it's also distressing, obviously, for Sonia. And one thing that I thought I could do for Sonia is I can't help with any of the medical stuff, but I can hopefully ameliorate some of Sonia's financial worries. So what I've done is I started a GoFundMe for Sonia, and we've been raising money to hopefully pay for Sonia's medical bills. I am putting it here in the chat. I'll probably also end up, if you're listening to this live stream afterwards, I'm going to have it in the description. But I would like to encourage all of you to go donate some amount of money to this fundraiser for Sonia, just so that hopefully Sonia can at least not have to worry about the money. Because we're here in the United States, and Sonia's probably going to owe thousands of dollars, and also can't even make food for themselves. They are bedridden right now in excruciating pain. So just understand that this is a really important thing that you can do for somebody who has sacrificed for decades of their life for our cause. Sonia has been a combat medic. Sonia has been one of the most active members in Cooperation Tulsa. Often Sonia was the one previous to this who was posting on the Cooperation Tulsa social media all the time. You might notice it's not happening as much. That's because Sonia's in the hospital now. So I hope that you all go over there and you donate to it. And might I add, I know there's a few of you in my audience and you're always asking. I come from some, privileged background. I come from some background where I've got money, or I've got access to resources. What can I do? This is exactly the kind of thing that you can do. This is precisely the way that you can use that privilege, that access to resources you've got, in order to help people who do not have access to those resources. So here it is. This is your opportunity. Go to the fundraiser, give as much money as you comfortably can, obviously, and that's true for everybody here that's involved. But yeah, I think that's it for the spiel for today. I think we're going to draw the stream to a close here. I just want to emphasize once again, I always forget I have to include all these different things. I have all these different things I need to juggle. If you are listening to the stream, just know that I really appreciate people who go through and they timestamp the parts of the stream that they really liked. Okay, like there was some ramble or some answer I gave that you really liked. Often I just go through the comments of these live streams and I just see which places y'all tagged, and then I cut those up, and those are what get released on Mondays most of the time. So just understand that when you do that, that often leads to a Monday release. In fact, you can almost kind of decide what I'm going to release on a Monday just by tagging your favorite parts of the stream. Isn't that interesting? It gives you power over the content. Anyway, I think that's about it, y'all. Can't think of anything else I want to say. Go donate to the fundraiser. There you go. Donate to the fundraiser. Also, spread it around. Spread the fundraiser all over the place. Especially if you know anybody who's just like one of these people who's got money and they're looking for places to use it. Perfect opportunity. Show them this fundraiser. Maybe they can help out somebody who's going through a very difficult life event. All right, everybody. think that's about where this one's going to end. Thank you all for joining and sitting here as I ramble. Today was pretty unstructured. We'll see if I even get any content out of this, but it was good talking with y'all. That's it for this time. I'll see y'all next time.